Rodney Alcala, born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala, was an American serial unaliver and convicted ex-offender who was sentenced to unalive in California for 7 unalivings committed between 1977 and 1979. He also pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 25 years to life for 2 further unalivings committed in New York. He was also indicted for an unaliving in Wyoming, although the charges filed were dropped. While he has been conclusively linked to 8 unalivings, the true number of victims remain unknown and could be as high as 130. He compiled a collection of more than 1,000 photographs of women, teenage girls and boys, many in sexually explicit poses. In 2016, he was charged with the 1977 unaliving of a woman identified in one of his photos. He is known to have assaulted one other photo subject, and police have speculated that there could be or unaliving of victims as well. Prosecutors said that he with his victims, strangling them until they lost consciousness and waiting until they were revived, sometimes repeating the process several times before he would eventually unalive them. The police detective described him as and others and compared him to Ted Bundy. Alcala is often referred to as he appeared on the television show The Dating Game in 1978 during the midst of his unaliving spree. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas, the third of 4 children born to Mexican-American couple Raul Alcala Bagua and Ana Maria Gutierrez. In 1951, his father moved the family to Mexico, then abandoned them 3 years later. In 1954, aged 11, his mother moved him and his 2 sisters to suburban LA. He was said to be an academically gifted student who was reasonably popular among his peers and was supported by his family. He attended various private schools during his youth before graduating from Cantwell Sacred Heart of Mary High School. He was on the yearbook planning committee and on the track and cross-country teams. In 1961, at the age of 17, he joined the United States Army to become a paratrooper and served as a clerk. During his service, he was noted by his commanding officer as being manipulative, vindictive, and insubordinate. He was disciplined on several occasions for assaulting young women. In 1964, after what was described as a nervous breakdown during which he went AWOL and hitchhiked from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to his mother's house in California, he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and estimated to have an IQ of 135 by a military psychiatrist. He was subsequently discharged from the army on medical grounds. Other diagnoses later proposed by various psychiatric experts at his trials included narcissistic personality disorder, BPD, malignant narcissism with psychopathy, and escheable sadism comorbidities. After being discharged from the army, he graduated from the UCLA School of Arts and Architecture. He later studied film under Roman Polanski at New York University. On the 25th of September 1968, a passing motorist named Donald Haynes called police after witnessing Alcala lure Tally Shapiro, aged 8 at the time, into his Hollywood apartment. Shapiro, who was residing in the Chateau Marmont with her family, was approached by Alcala on her way to school when he pulled up beside her in his car and asked if she needed a ride. Shapiro initially refused, but when she heard him say that he knew her parents, she got in the car. Alcala then took her to his apartment where he told Shapiro that he wanted to show her a picture. When the police arrived, Shapiro was found alive in a pool of her own blood, having been hard and beaten with a steel bar, and Alcala had fled. Shapiro was in a coma for 32 days and spent months in recovery. To evade the arrest warrant stemming from the Shapiro assault, Alcala left California and enrolled at NYU using the name John Berger. Cornelia Crilly, a 23-year-old Trans World Airlines flight attendant, was found hard and unalived in a Manhattan apartment on the 12th of June 1971. Alcala had strangled her with her own nylon stockings, leaving her unalived in her apartment at 427 East 38th Street. It is believed that Crilly met Alcala when she moved into a new apartment and she accepted his help in moving some furniture. Her unaliving remained unsolved until 2011. In 1971, Alcala obtained a job at a New Hampshire arts camp, Camp New Beginnings, in the village of Georges Mills on Lake Sunapee. as a counsellor for children, using a slightly different alias, John Berger. The FBI added him to its 10 most wanted fugitives in early 1971. A few months later, 2 campers at the camp noticed his photo on an FBI poster at the post office. That August, Alcala was arrested and extradited to California. By then, Tali Shapiro's parents had relocated their entire family to Mexico and refused to allow Shapiro to testify at the trial. Without their primary witness, prosecutors were unwilling to charge Alcala with an attempted unaliving. He was instead convicted of Child M, then a lesser charge, and sentenced to 3 years. He was paroled in 1974 after 34 months. Less than 2 months after his release, he was re-arrested and convicted for assaulting a 13-year-old girl identified in court records as Julie J., who had accepted what she thought would be a ride to school. He was then paroled after serving 2 years and released in 1977 as a registered S offender. After his second release in 1977, his LA parole officer made the unusual and not very clever choice of permitting a repeat offender and a known flight risk to travel to New York City. New York Police Department investigators now believe that a week after returning to Manhattan, he unalived Ellen Jane Hover, 23-year-old daughter of nightclub owner Herman Hover, and goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. She was last seen at a New York apartment on the 15th of July, 1977. Her date book showed that she had an appointment to meet with one John Berger that same day. Later in 1977, the FBI received a tip about Alcala's 1971 arrest in New Hampshire related to the Shapiro case in California. Alcala admitted to knowing Hover under questioning, but investigators couldn't arrest him since they had not found her body. Her remains were discovered in 1978, buried under heavy rocks on a hillside overlooking the Hudson River, near a location on the John D. Rockefeller estate, where an aspiring model would later report that Berger had taken photos of her. In 1977, he worked briefly at the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter, and he was interviewed by members of the Hillside Strangler Task Force as part of their investigation into known S offenders. Although he was ruled out as the Strangler, he was arrested and served a brief sentence for marijuana possession. During this period, he convinced hundreds of young men and women that he was a professional fashion photographer and took pictures of them for his portfolio. A Times co-worker later recalled that Alcala shared his photos with his workmates. She said, Leanne Leiden, who was 17 when Alcala photographed her in 1979, reported that Leiden further reported that the portfolio Alcala shared with her also included in 1979, in the midst of his killing spree, he was a contestant on the popular game show The Dating Game. Host Jim Lang introduced him as a Jed Miles, a fellow Bachelor contestant on that episode, later described Alcala as a with Alcala won the competition and a date with the episode's bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, who subsequently refused to go on a date with him because she found him creepy. On the 9th of November 1977, he murdered Jill Terry Barkham, an 18-year-old girl from Oneida, New York, and disposed of her body on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in LA. Barkham was found in a knee-to-chest position and naked from the waist down. There were signs of SA and she'd been strangled with a pair of blue rope ties and beaten. She also had 3 bite marks on her right breast. Initially, authorities believed Barkham was a victim of the Hillside Strangler. However, after the arrests of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono, neither of whom confessed to or were convicted of her murder, authorities determined that her case was unrelated. On the 16th of December 1977, 27-year-old nurse Georgia Marie Wickstead was discovered dead in a Malibu apartment. She was last seen when she drove another nurse, Barbara Gale, home from a bar. When Wickstead didn't show up for work the next day, Gail and her co-workers reported him missing. Police arrived at Wickstead's apartment to find signs of forced entry. Wickstead was posed naked on a bedroom floor, strangled with her nylons. She'd been essayed, her skull had been bashed, and her genitals had been mutilated. Prosecutors later used DNA evidence and a handprint found at the scene to convict Alcala. On the 24th of June 1978, Charlotte Lee Lamb, 31-year-old legal secretary from Santa Monica, was found dead in the laundry room of the apartment complex where she was living in El Segundo. She'd been essayed, beaten and strangled with a shoelace and was posed with her hands behind her back. DNA at the scene would match that of Alcala, and DNA on a pair of earrings found in his storage locker after Robin Christine Samso's 1979 murder would eventually prove to match Lamb's DNA. On the 14th of February 1979, Alcala picked up 15-year-old hitchhiker Monique Hoyt in Riverside County. He drove Hoyt to his apartment where he AR'd her. They then travelled to a secluded mountainous area in Joshua Tree, California, where Alcala took photos of her in her underwear as well as photos of him AR'ing her once again. He bound and gagged her and began a sustained assault, which included further R and S. Alcala bludgeoned Hoyt in the head with a rock, but Hoyt luckily managed to escape when Alcala entered a gas station bathroom on the drive back to Riverside County. Hoyt filed a police report about her ordeal and Alcala was arrested, but his mother posted his bail. On the 13th of June 1979, Jill Marie Parenthau, 21-year-old computer keypunch operator, left work early to go to a baseball game. When she didn't make it to work the following morning, police went to her Burbank apartment and found signs of forced entry. She was dead, naked on her bathroom floor. She'd been posed with pillows under her shoulders. She'd been essayed, beaten and strangled. Her killer cut himself crawling through a window, and blood evidence would later identify Alcala as the perpetrator. Parento's friend, Catherine Bryant, testified that she and Parento had met Alcala at a club several times before. On the 20th of June 1979, Robin Christine Samso, a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach, disappeared as she rode a borrowed bicycle from her Huntington Beach home to a ballet class. Her decomposing body was found 12 days later in the LA foothills, dumped off Santa Anita Canyon Road. She'd been beaten, AR'd and stabbed with a knife. Samson's friend told police that the strangler had approached them on the beach asking to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of the photographer and Alcala's parole officer recognised him. Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail. He went on trial for Samso's murder and was found guilty in May 1980 and sentenced to death in June. However, the verdict was overturned by the California Supreme Court in 1984 because jurors had been improperly informed of his prior S crimes. In May 1986, after a second trial virtually identical to the first except for the omission of the prior criminal record testimony, he was again convicted and sentenced to death in August. In 1992, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict, but Alcala filed a federal habeas corpus petition. And in 2001, the United States District Court granted it, overturning Alcala's second conviction. That decision was upheld in 2003 by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel, in part because a witness was not allowed to support Alcala's contention that the park ranger who found Samso's body had been While preparing for their third prosecution in 2003, Orange County investigators learned that Alcala's DNA, sampled under a new state law over his objections, matched semen found at an R murder scene of 2 women in LA. Additional evidence, including another cold case DNA match in 2004, led to Alcala's indictment for the murders of 4 additional women: Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parento. All of the bodies were found. Another pair of earrings found in Alcala's Seattle storage locker had residue that matched Lamb's DNA. During his incarceration between the second and third trials, Alcala wrote and self-published a book, You, the Jury, in which he claimed innocence in the Samso case and suggested a different suspect. He also filed 2 lawsuits against the California penal system for a slip-and-fall incident and for refusing to provide him a low-fat diet. In 2003, prosecutors entered a motion to join the Samso charges with those of the 4 newly discovered victims. Alcala's attorneys contested it. As one of them explained, In 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled over the prosecution's favor. In February 2010, Alcala stood trial on the 5 joined charges. For the third trial, Alcala elected to act as his own attorney. He took to the stand in his own defense and for 5 hours played the roles of both interrogator and witness, asking himself questions and addressing himself as in a deeper than normal voice, followed by answering them. During his self-questioning and answering session, he told jurors, often in a rambling monotone, that he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for jobs as a photographer at the time Samso was kidnapped. He showed the jury a portion of his 1978 appearance on The Dating Game in an attempt to prove that the earrings found in his Seattle locker were his, not Samso's. Jed Mills, the actor who competed against Alcala on the show, told the reporter that earrings were not yet a socially acceptable accoutrement for men in 1978. He said, Alcala made no significant attempt to dispute the 4 added charges, other than assert that he couldn't remember killing any of the women. As part of his closing argument, he played the Arlo Guarnieri song, Alice's Restaurant, in which the protagonist tells the psychiatrist that he wants to kill. After less than 2 days, the jury convicted him on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. A surprise witness during the penalty phase of the trial was Shapiro. Richard Rappaport, a psychiatrist paid by Alcala and the only defense witness, testified that BPD could explain Alcala's claims that he had no memory of committing the murders. The prosecutor argued that Alcala was a who in March 2010, Alcala was sentenced to death for a 3rd time. After his 2010 conviction, New York authorities announced that they would no longer pursue Alcala because of his status as a convict awaiting execution. Nevertheless, in January 2011, a Manhattan grand jury indicted him for the murders of Crilly and Hoover in 1971 and 1977. In June 2012, he was extradited to New York, where he initially entered not guilty pleas on both counts. In December 2012, he changed both pleas to guilty, citing a desire to return to California to pursue appeals on his death penalty conviction. On the 7th of January 2013, a Manhattan judge sentenced Alcala to an additional 25 years to life. The death penalty has not been an option in New York State since 2007. In March 2010, the Huntington Beach, California, and New York City Police Departments released 120 of Alcala's photographs and sought the public's help in identifying them in the hope of determining if any of the women and children he photographed were additional victims. Approximately 900 additional photos could not be made public, police said, because they were too sexually explicit. In the first few weeks, police reported that approximately 21 women had come forward to identify themselves and said they believed recognised loved ones who none of the photos were unequivocally connected to a missing person case or unsolved murder until 2013. 110 of the original photos remain posted online, and police continue to solicit the public's help with further identifications. Most of the subjects remain unidentified. Police fear that some of the subjects may be additional cold case victims. Following Alcala's death in 2021, 68-year-old Morgan Rowan contacted Steve Hodel, one of the original investigators in the Shapiro case, and described being attacked by Alcala in July 1968 when she was 16. Rowan claimed that while she was living in Hollywood, she was approached by Alcala at a teen nightclub on the Sunset Strip and entered his car believing he was driving to an IHOP restaurant. Instead, Alcala drove her to his apartment a few blocks away where he said he was having a party. When they arrived, Alcala dragged Rowan into his bedroom, barred the door, and beat and arred her. Rowan was rescued by friends and acquaintances who broke into the room through a window. Alcala fled, and Rowan was pulled from the apartment by her friends. In March 2011, investigators in Marin County, California, north side of San Francisco, announced that they were confident that Alcala was responsible for the 9th of October 1977 murder of 19-year-old Pamela Jean Pam Lamson, who disappeared after making a trip to Fisherman's Wharf to meet a man who offered to photograph her. Her battered, naked body was subsequently found in Marin County near a hiking trail. With no fingerprints or usable DNA, charges were never filed, but police claimed that there was sufficient evidence to convince them that Alcala committed the crime. In September 2016, Alcala was charged with the murder of 28-year-old Christine Ruth Thornton. Thornton and her lover moved away from their family to live in San Antonio, Texas. After they split up in Biloxi, Mississippi in June 1977, she was last seen hitchhiking and was never heard from again. In 2013, an image made public by Huntington Beach PD and NYPD of a dark-haired woman riding a motorcycle while wearing a yellow shirt was recognized by Thornton's sister. Her body was found in Seawater County, Wyoming along Interstate 80 in 1982, but wasn't identified until 2015 when DNA supplied by Thornton's relatives matched tissue samples from her remains. Alcala admitted to taking the photo but not to murdering the woman, who was approximately 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. Thornton is the first alleged murder victim linked to Alcala's photos made public in 2010. The 73-year-old Alcala was reportedly too ill to make the journey from California to Wyoming to stand trial on new charges. In 2010, Seattle police named Alcala as a person of interest in several unsolved murders in Washington state since Alcala had rented a Seattle area storage locker in which investigators later found jewelry belonging to 2 of his California victims in 1979. Other cold cases were reportedly targeted for reinvestigation in California, New York, New Hampshire, and Arizona. Sherry Ann Greenham, 20, was last seen in Waterville, Washington on the 14th of September 1976 after she was released from Douglas County Jail. A photograph found in Alcala's locker was shown to Greenman's family and they confirmed it was not her. Antoinette Jean Whitaker, 13, was a student who'd been living in a foster home when she walked out with an unidentified man on the 9th of July 1977. A week later, her body was found fully clothed and propped up on her hands and knees in a vacant lot in Lake City, Seattle. She'd been stabbed to death. There was no evidence that she'd been essayed. On the 17th of February 1978, Joyce Francine Gaunt, 17, was found at a picnic area of Seaward Park, Seattle. She was nude and lying on her face. Her skull had been crushed. She was a developmentally disabled teen who had also been beaten and strangled and essayed. She'd been living in a group home in Capitol Hill when she had last been seen leaving to meet with an unidentified man on the 16th of February. Exactly 42 years after his apprehension on the 24th of July 1979, Alcala died of a heart attack at a hospital in Kings County on the 24th of July 2021. He was 77 years old and waiting on California's death row. Randall Brent Woodfield is an American serial killer, serial heiress, kidnapper, robber, burglar, and former football player who was dubbed the I-5 Killer or the I-5 Bandit by the media due to the crimes he committed along the Interstate 5 corridor running through Washington, Oregon, and California. Before his capture, he was suspected in multiple essays and murders. Though convicted of only 1 murder, he's been linked to a total of 18 murders and is suspected of having killed up to as many as 44 people. A native of Oregon, he was the 3rd child of a prominent Newport family. He began to exhibit abnormal behaviours during his teenage years and was arrested for indecent exposure while still in high school. He played as a wide receiver for the Portland State Vikings and was drafted by the National Football League in 1974. An athlete for much of his life to play for the Green Bay Packers but was cut from the team during training after a series of indecent exposure arrests. In 1975, he began a string of robberies and SAs on women in Portland, which he committed at knife point. Between 1980 and 81, he committed multiple murders in the cities along the I-5 corridor. His earliest documented murder was that of Sherry Ayers, a former classmate whom he had known since childhood, in October 1980. After committing numerous violent crimes, he was arrested in March 1981 and convicted in June of the murder of Shari Hull and attempted murder of her co-worker Beth Wilmot. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 90 years. He has never confessed to any of the crimes of which he has been accused or convicted. Though he's only been convicted of 1 murder and 1 attempted murder, he has been linked via DNA to other methods of numerous unsolved homicides in the ensuing decades. Authorities have estimated his total number of killings to be as many as 44. CBS News named him one of the deadliest serial killers in American history. He is currently incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Randall Woodfield was born on the 26th of December 1950 in Salem, Oregon, the 3rd child of an upper-middle-class family. His mother was a homemaker and his father was an executive at Pacific Northwest Bell. He has two older sisters, one of whom became a doctor and the other an attorney. The Woodfield family was said to have been well known and respected in their community. Woodfield was raised in Otter Rock, Oregon, a small seaside town approximately 8 miles north of Newport. Popular among his peers, he was a football star at Newport High School. Though his childhood was by all accounts stable, he began to exhibit sexually dysfunctional behaviours during junior high school, particularly exposing himself in public. While in high school, he exposed himself to a group of teenage girls on Yaquina Bay Bridge and was arrested. His football coaches helped conceal the incident to prevent him from being ousted from the team, though his parents forced him to attend therapy after the incident. After graduating from high school, his criminal record was expunged and he attended Treasure Valley Community College in Ontario, Oregon, later transferring to Portland State University in Portland in 1970, where he played for the Portland State Vikings as a wide receiver. At Portland State, he was active in Campus Crusade for Christ, an evangelical Christian student group, and lived in an apartment located on the South Park blocks. Gary Hamblett, Woodfield's football coach, recalled, "Other teammates and peers of Woodfield recalled him as soft-spoken and kind of a loner who didn't have a lot of friends but noted his athleticism. Despite thriving in college, he was arrested on several occasions for petty crimes, first in 1974, vandalizing the apartment of his ex-girlfriend, and later in 1972 for public indecency in Vancouver, Washington. In 1973, he was arrested again for public indecency in Multnomah County, Oregon. He chose to drop out of college 3 semesters shy of graduating, and he was selected as a wide receiver in the 1974 NFL Draft by the Green Bay Packers in the 17th round, 428th pick. He tried to establish himself within the Packers during coach and general manager Dan Devine's last season, but he couldn't shake his problems with a trip across the country. He signed a contract in February 1974 and was cut during training camp, failing to make the team's final roster. After being cut by the Packers, he played for the 1974 season with semi-pro Manitowoc Chiefs and worked for Oshkosh Truck. He left Wisconsin in late 1974 and returned to Portland, feeling disgraced by his failure to maintain his football career. In early 1975, several Portland women were accosted by a knife-wielding man, forced to perform oral S, and then robbed of their handbags. Law enforcement responded to the string of crimes by having female police officers act as decoys. On the 3rd of March 1975, Woodfield was arrested after being caught with marked money from one of the undercover officers. Upon interrogation, he confessed to the crimes, blaming poor actual impulse control, which he claimed was the result of his use of steroids. In April 1975, he pled guilty to reduced charges of second-degree robbery. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was freed on parole in July 1979 after only having served 4 years. On the 9th of October 1980, Sherry Lynn Ayers, an X-ray technician and former classmate of Woodfield, was aired and murdered in her apartment in SW 9th Place in downtown Portland. Her body was discovered on the 11th of October by her fiancé. She had been bludgeoned and stabbed repeatedly in the neck. Ayers, a University of Oregon graduate, had known Woodfield since 2nd grade, having attended the same schools in Newport. During Woodfield's prior 4-year imprisonment, he and Ayers had responded via letters. Suspecting Woodfield's involvement in Sherry Lynn's murder, the Ayers family provided his name to law enforcement. He was questioned but refused to sit for a polygraph test. Homicide detectives found his answers generally evasive and deceptive, but because his blood type didn't match the semen found in her body, no charges were filed. 1 month later, on the morning of the 27th of November, Thanksgiving Day, Woodfield arrived in the North Portland home of Darcy Renee Fix, 22, planning to assault her. He had known Fix during college as an ex-girlfriend of one of his close friends. Douglas Keith Altig, 24, was at Fix's home when Woodfield arrived. Both Fix and Altig were subsequently bound and shot to death execution style in the home, and Fix's .32 caliber revolver was missing from the scene. Due to his acquaintance with Fix, Woodfield was questioned about the murders, but law enforcement found no concrete evidence pointing to his involvement. These are various composites of Woodfield during his robberies in late 1980 and early 1981. After committing the murders of Fix and Altig, Woodfield began a series of robberies throughout the Pacific Northwest, On the 9th of December 1980, Woodfield, wearing a fake beard, held up a Vancouver, Washington gas station at gunpoint. In Eugene, Oregon, 4 nights later, on the 13th of December, he raided an ice cream parlor. On the 14th of December, he robbed a drive-in restaurant in Albany, Oregon. During one of the robberies, Woodfield wore what appeared to be a Band-Aid or tape across the bridge of his nose, similar to nasal strips worn by football players. On the 21st of December, Woodfield, again wearing a false beard, accosted a waitress in Seattle, taping her to a restaurant bathroom and forcing her at gunpoint to masturbate him. By January 1981, law enforcement had dubbed the robber the I-5 Bandit, given his apparent preference for committing crimes along the Interstate 5 corridor. On the 8th of January, he held up the same Vancouver gas station he had robbed in December, this time forcing the female attendant to expose her breasts after he emptied the cash register. 3 days later, on the 11th of January, he robbed a market in Eugene. The next day, on the 12th of January, he shot and wounded a female grocery clerk in a store in Sutherland, Oregon. On the 14th of January, a man matching the description of the I-5 Bandit was wearing a false beard, invaded a home occupied by two sisters aged 8 and 10. He ordered the two girls to undress and essayed them. 4 days later in Salem, a man matching the same description entered an office building and essayed two women, Sherry Hull and Beth Wilmot, after which he killed Hull and wounded Wilmot, leaving her for dead. On the 26th and 29th of January, he travelled to southern Oregon and committed robberies in Eugene, Medford, and Grants Pass. In the latter location, two females, a clerk and customer, were assaulted by the robber. On the 3rd of February 1981, the bodies of Donna Eckert, 37, and a 14-year-old daughter, Janelle Charlotte Jarvis, were found together in a bed in their home in Mountain Gate, California, north of Redding. Each had been shot several times in the head. Forensic tests showed that the girl had also been essayed. The same day in Redding, a female store clerk was kidnapped and held in a holdup. An identical crime was reported in Eureka, California on the 4th of February, with the same man robbing the Ashland, Oregon motel that night. Then on the 9th of February in Corvallis, a man matching the I-5 Bandit's description held up a fabric store and molested the girl and a customer before he left. 3 days later, robberies committed by a man matching the I-5 Bandit's description occurred in Vancouver, Olympia, and Bellevue, Washington. The Olympia and Bellevue incidents included 3 essays. Upon an impending visit to Portland, Woodfield planned a Valentine's Day party at the city's downtown Marriott Hotel, inviting friends and acquaintances from college. After no guests came, Woodfield drove to the Beaverton home of 18-year-old Julie Reitz, whom he had met while working as a bouncer at the Fawcett, a bar in Portland. He arrived at her home around 2 a.m. on the 15th of February. Around 4 a.m., he arred and then shot her in the head, killing her. Police investigating the scene determined that Reitz had a glass of wine with her attacker and had also begun to prepare coffee. A package of instant coffee was discovered on the kitchen counter, and water in the kettle had been left to completely boil away. By the 28th of February, the investigation was now focused on Woodfield, but then the I-5 Bandit had struck 3 more times in Eugene on the 18th and 21st of February, and with another essay in Corvallis on the 25th of February. Detectives in Marion County assembled a call log showing Woodfield had placed calls via calling cards at payphones near the murder sites around the time they were committed. On the 5th of March 1981, Woodfield was brought into the Salem Police Department for an interrogation after Lisa Garcia positively identified him in a photo lineup. His apartment in Springfield, Oregon was subsequently searched 2 days later by a warrant. Inside, law enforcement discovered a spent .32 shell casing inside a racquetball bag, as well as a roll of tape that matched the tape found on the victims. On the 7th of March, he was taken into custody after being positively identified by several Oregon robbery victims. On the 16th of March, indictments for murder, sodomy, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, and illegal possession of firearms were initiated from various jurisdictions in Washington and Oregon. In the summer of 1981, Woodfield was tried in Salem for the murder of Hull, as well as charges for sodomy and attempted murder of Wilmot. Wilmot testified against him at the trial and was a key in the prosecution's conviction. Chris Van Dyke, son of actor Dick Van Dyke, was the Marion County District Attorney at the time and prosecuted the case. Van Dyke would later characterize Woodfield as the coldest, most detached defendant I've ever seen. On the 26th of June 1981, after 3.5 hours of deliberation, Woodfield was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. In October 1981, a second trial was held in Benson County, Oregon, in which Woodfield received sodomy and weapons charges tied to one of the attacks in a restaurant bathroom. Prior to his trial, his counsel attempted to move the trial from the Willamette Valley. He felt that, owing to the publicity the case received, Woodfield would not get a fair trial there. The judge in the case denied counsel's request, along with a request to hypnotise a prosecution witness in an effort to determine if the witness had been influenced by the media coverage. Woodfield was convicted by the jury and had an additional 35 years added to his already instated sentence. Despite the apparent links with countless other crimes and homicides, Woodfield would not be prosecuted for the majority of the crimes he was believed to have committed. Unable to afford multiple trials, the state of Oregon was satisfied with Woodfield's existing life sentence. Woodfield is serving his sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. In October 1983, he was injured by a fellow inmate during a prison disturbance. In April 1987, he filed a $12 million libel suit against Ann Rule, the author who had written The I-5 Killer, an account of Woodfield's life and crime spree in 1984. The federal court in Oregon dismissed the lawsuit in January 1988, citing that the statute of limitations on such a lawsuit had expired. By 1990, after discovery of more victims, Woodfield was suspected in as many as 44 homicides. In 2001 and 2006, DNA testing linked Woodfield to two additional murders in Oregon that occurred from 1980 and 1981. During his time in the penitentiary, Woodfield was married 3 times and divorced twice. Some letters he wrote from prison were sold online as a collection titled The Serial Killer Letters and published by the Charles Press. In one of these letters, he wrote to journalist Jenna Furio, The majority of Woodfield's victims were thin white women in their 20s, many of middle-class backgrounds. A number of his victims, particularly in the instances for robbery and assay, were young employees of restaurants and convenience stores located along Interstate 5, which Woodfield traversed in his 1974 Champagne Edition gold Volkswagen Beetle. In some instances, Woodfield's attacks were undertaken entirely at random, while in others, the murders were incited by rejected sexual advances. His level of acquaintance with the victims varied. Some he knew personally, while others were just complete strangers. During his robberies, assaults, and killings, Woodfield typically concealed his identity by wearing a hoodie, a fake beard, and most curiously, a strip of athletic tape across his nose. Police believe Woodfield may have done this to obscure his features and prevent victims from identifying him in a police lineup. His victims were typically killed via gunshot, and the crimes were sexually motivated. Jim Lawrence, a detective from Portland's Cold Case Unit, noted Woodfield's lack of remorse and responsibility in his crimes, saying, Lawrence also noted Woodfield's egotism during his early interrogations. Ann Rule, who documented Woodfield's crimes in the I-5 Killer, suggested that rejection and feelings of inadequacy were factors that drove him to violence, particularly against women. She also characterized Woodfield as a smooth ladies' man whose good looks and disposition aided in his ability to trap victims. Unlike many serial killers whose killing patterns were characterized by intervals or cooling off periods, Woodfield's murders and other crimes escalated rapidly, increasing in successive frequency. Woodfield never confessed to any of the murders of which he's been convicted, accused, or which he has been linked to. Though convicted only in the murder of Shari Hull, Woodfield has been linked to numerous other murders via DNA and other methods. Criminologists and detectives have provided estimated totals of numbers of killings ranging from 22 to as many as 44 unsolved homicides. Woodfield is also estimated to have committed at least 60 unsolved Rs. The following is a list of Woodfield's confirmed victims. 9th of October 1980, Sherilyn Ayers, 29, a former classmate of Woodfield's, was found in her Portland home on the 11th of October, was bludgeoned and stabbed multiple times in the neck. 27th of November, Darcy Rilling Fix, 22, and Douglas Keith Altig, 24, both found shot to death with a .32 revolver in Fix's North Portland home. 21st of December, a named woman, 25, assaulted at gunpoint in a Seattle restroom, forced to masturbate Woodfield, survived. 12th of January 1981, Susie Bennett, 20, a market clerk in Sutherlin, Oregon, shot by Woodfield during a robbery, survived. 18th of January, Shari Lynn Hull, 20, and Beth Wilmot, 20, employees at the Transamerica office in Kaiser, Oregon, accosted by Woodfield during their evening work shift, essayed both women before shooting them both in the head. Hull died of her injuries, Wilmot survived. 3rd of February, unnamed woman 18, kidnapped at gunpoint and ad near Redding, California in the morning hours, survived. Donnelly Eckert, 37, and her daughter Janelle Charlotte Jarvis, 14, both found SA'd and shot to death in their Shasta County home. 4th of February, unnamed woman, kidnapped and ad in Eureka, California, survived. 15th of February, Julie Ann Reeds, 18, ad and shot to death in a Beaverton, Oregon home at around 4 a.m, was an acquaintance of Woodfield's throughout his job as a bartender. Retracing Woodfield's movements along Interstate 5, law enforcement have identified at least 25 other potential murders, while other estimations suggest up to 44. Notable is Martha Morrison, 17, who disappeared in Eugene in September 1974 and was found murdered the following month near Vancouver. Her remains were unidentified until 2015. Both Woodfield and Ted Bundy have been considered suspects in her murder. However, after Morrison's case was identified, law enforcement reached out to the public in an effort to encourage people to come forward with tips. In August 2017, a bloodstain on a pistol owned by a longtime suspect, Warren Forrest, was matched to Morrison through DNA testing. During the spring of 1980, Marshall Wheater, 19, and Kathy Allen, 18, vanished while hitchhiking from Spokane, Washington, area of their hometown to Fairbanks, Alaska. Their bodies were found in May 1981, covered by several inches of ash from the 18th of May 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Suspected serial killer Martin Lee Sanders was later convicted of their murders, but as of 2018, the case remains unsolved.